And a welcome back to Thursdays with Charlie. This is episode 38, and it's the 4th of February. We're into the second month of 2021. If you watched Mass over the weekend, or if you were present at the actual Mass, you got to see my newest owl, and I definitely want to show him off. There are two companies that really make spectacular stuffed animals. One of them is Wild Republic. The other one is Melissa and Doug, and I have wanted a Melissa and Doug owl for years. When I went to buy it a few weeks ago, I found out that they were not available at the brand new price. So I went on the secondary market and I was able to find this Melissa and Doug owl, a great horned owl. He's 17 and a half inches high. And I got him for only $19, including shipment. So I'm really very grateful to have him. He's the newest one in my collection. Very glad to have him as part of the collection. As you know, the reservation system remains in effect. It's working out fairly well. We had upwards of 80 people at the 4 p.m. Mass on this past weekend, and most other Masses were around the area of 50, so people are taking advantage of it. So far, if you forget to make the phone call Thursday or Friday, please feel free to come. Most likely, we could accommodate you. We'll just take your name and your temperature and your phone number when you arrive at the Mass. We're looking forward to increasing capacity, but right now we're still at the 25% capacity, so that allows us the 100 people for church. We did get some word back on the dedication of the Garces Center, the new building. It's the first building and the only building in the Diocese of Las Vegas to be named for Father Francisco Garces. It's the only building in the Diocese of Las Vegas to have been built during the year of the COVID virus. It's the only building in the Diocese of Las Vegas to have been built during the diocesan 25th anniversary year. We approached the bishop for when he and his vicar general, Monsignor Gregory Gordon, could be down here, and they appreciate the fact that we are the first and the only in so many ways, but the earliest date that they could make it down here for a dedication is Columbus Day weekend, the 10th of October, which is a Sunday at 2 p.m., And so we agreed, and the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, this is really not so bad. You might recall, some of our older parishioners, that our church building was dedicated on Columbus Day weekend. At that year, it was the 11th of October in 2003. So 18 years later, we'll be dedicating the Garces Center on Columbus Day weekend. You'll hear more about that in the intervening time. Meanwhile, I decided we were planning on the 4th of March, and that is actually a day 245 years ago when Father Garces was really here in what is now Laughlin. So I think we're going to do a simple blessing of the building just for our local people on that day. Let people come in and see the building and enjoy its beauty, and then start using it as much as we can. So I'll have details on that, maybe as early as this weekend, certainly by next Thursday's show, to let you know what we're planning to do. We will do something on the 4th of March to gain access to the building and let everybody enjoy the wonders that it is going to bring to our parish. We're very, very grateful for it. As you know, Lent begins on the 17th of February. That's only a couple of weeks away. I'll have more information going out in the weekly letter that we're going to mail out next week. More information in next Thursday's show as well. Just for a preview, we are planning on doing Stations of the Cross on Friday evenings in Lent. There will be no soup supper because the diocese says we still cannot serve food to groups. So the Stations of the Cross are planned for Friday evenings during Lent at 6 p.m. The Tiger Mass we're planning on doing at 6 a.m. on Fridays in Lent, and so we're looking forward to making announcements about that beginning. And of course, Father Michael Moore will be here for the parish mission. He's going to preach all of the Masses on the weekend after Ash Wednesday, and he'll do the parish mission from Monday through Thursday, the 22nd through the 25th of February. We'll have details on that out at the Masses this weekend, and of course, more to say about it on Thursday's show next week. Today we close on the sale of the rectory. The rectory at 3115 Terrace View Drive has been our place of living, our rectory for the parish since 1992. Father John McShane purchased it from John and Ann Altamare in the first year the parish was in existence. As a matter of fact, I visited here in November of 1992 with my mother, and we both stayed at the rectory. So I've slept in the rectory. My mother has slept in the rectory right from the very beginning. We've been there. Of course, the rectory is a two-story building. It's over 35 years old, very steep steps up to the second floor, and so it was a good idea to put it on the market now that it's a seller's market here in Laughlin, and to sell it and to make it easier so that someday when I decide to retire, I'm living in my own house here in Laughlin for the past 10 years, and so it wasn't getting as much use as it should. So getting the money to put aside from that, someday when I retire, then we'll be looking for a one-story rectory in Laughlin for whatever priest will be coming at that time. But there's no rush on that, and meanwhile, it was a beautiful thing to sell it so quickly. It sold within the first hour. We put it on the market, and the closing is today. So actually, by the time I finish the show, the closing will have taken place. Every priest who has served our parish here in Laughlin has stayed in the rectory. Father John McShane, who began the parish in 1992, was the one who first rented and then purchased the rectory from John and Ann Altamare. Monsignor Kevin McCullough, Father Kevin, when he was here for those 9 months following John McShane, stayed in that rectory. The following priest, Father Peter Romeo, who worked for the tribunal, stayed in that rectory. Father Ray Schultz, who followed him, stayed for 3 years in the rectory. And of course, Father Frank Inserto was there for 7 years. When I came in 2008, I did my first 3 years in the rectory before purchasing my own place. I knew for sure that I wanted to make my home here in Laughlin, so even while working and after working, I fully intend to be a part of the Laughlin community, and I look forward to it. But the rectory has served us well, but now it's time to move on from there. I don't know if some of you remember, but there was a wonderful comedy play that came out some years ago called Nonsense. And Nonsense was about an order of nuns in Hoboken, New Jersey, and they went by the nickname the Little Hobos because they came from Hoboken. And they had a lot of good comedy, clean comedy in the show, and it was actually a lot of fun to watch. I saw it many, many times. The cook in the convent was Sister Julia, Child of God. A good play on Julia Child. And as the story goes, Sister Julia, Child of God, created a vichyssoise, a potato soup, for supper one evening, and it had been poisoned in some way by being out in the air too long. It had gone bad, and she poisoned all of the nuns. And that's how the story begins. It's hard to believe that we go from that into a comedy. But I mention it because, for some strange reason, I've always liked that part of the show, even though I am not much, and I'm hardly any of a cook myself. And I find myself sometimes online watching cooking shows. In fact, I've seen some weird ones lately where they were trying recipes like how to prepare python. Apparently, there's an outgrowth, an amazing abundance of pythons in Florida, and they're capturing them and trying to find a use for them. So python dinners. And the other recipe that I thought was really odd was deep-fried watermelon. I'm not sure even how good that would possibly be. I love watermelon, but I don't really like the thought of deep-frying it. Well, at any rate, while watching the cooking shows this week, I ended up seeing a recipe for what they call the easiest cheesecake. And I watched it. Now, the chances of my ever doing this are probably very, very slim. But watching it was actually fascinating, so I wanted to tell you what it looked like and how it went. And I really think I agree with the fact that it is easy. You take a bag of pretzels, preferably those long stick pretzels, the little pretzel sticks-like things, and you push them onto the bottom of a greased baking pan, covering the bottom with these little pretzel sticks. And you press them down a little bit. Don't crush them, just press them down a little bit. On top of that, you pour a can or 2 cans, depending on how large the baking dish is, of strawberry pie filling. Just pour it out and then kind of smooth it over the top so it covers all the pretzels. Then on top of that, you take a package of whipped cream cheese, and you take that and you spread that so it covers the top of all of the strawberries. Then on top of that, you pour 1 box of white cake mix and just drip it on so it covers all of the whipped cream cheese. And then you take a stick of butter and you cut it into thin pats of butter and you just scatter them along the top. You put it into a 350-degree oven and you bake it for about a half an hour. And they claim that it is really delicious. I'll agree with the fact that it sounds really easy to do, and it looked beautiful, I have to admit, on the pictures over there. I'm not sure how it would taste, but I would be willing to bet all the ingredients in there certainly sound really good. So it might be something to try on an afternoon when you want to just experiment a little bit with it. Certainly easy enough. The ingredients were simple. I think there's 5 ingredients in the whole thing. I was thinking back when I was in high school and getting ready to go to college back in the 1960s. There was something that was going around. It was called the Great Books Program. And in the Great Books Program, some colleges were actually proposing to do an entire college curriculum based on some of the great books of Western civilization. People like Chaucer or Aristotle or Thomas Aquinas was actually included in the list. Euclid, some of the great writers. And I thought back to that, and I looked up the list. I believe at the time that I was going from high school to college, there were about 51 books on the Great Books list. Over the years, those books have varied a little bit. Some of the old standards have stayed there for sure forever and ever. But it seemed like an interesting program. I'm not sure if any colleges or universities do that anymore, where they run an entire curriculum based on the great books of Western civilization. But it sounded like a beautiful and ambitious project at the time. Well, it got me thinking, if those are the great books of Western civilization, then I wonder if I had to put together a list of the great books that I've found in the course of my life. What would I find and what would I include on that list? And so one night this week, I just sat down and I started making a list of what I would consider the great books of my life, books that I've encountered in the course of my time here on earth. The first book I ever purchased with my own money, I did it as a high school student, and I paid $4.95 for a hardcover edition of a book called Prayers by Michael Quoist, Quoist. It had just come out in the 1960s. He was a French priest. Michael, by the way, is spelled Michel in the French. Michel, I guess, would be a proper pronunciation. And I spent $4.95 of my own money to buy this hardcover little book. It was a small little hardcover book. The prayers were absolutely beautiful. And even over the decades, as I've gone back and looked at them, yes, some of them sound a little dated in their wording, but they're still really beautiful prayers. And I think that book has some timeless qualities. So should you ever encounter it, if you're able to find it, I believe it's still available on the secondary market. It's worth taking a look at. Prayers by Michael Quoist. The other ones I started to add, and there was a book called Reflections. It was an 8 by 10 almost photo book, you might want to say, and it was by Monsignor James Turo. And Jim Turo, Monsignor Turo, was one of my seminary professors. He has written articles for several really good publications. He wrote a lot for the Jerome Biblical Commentary. He's he's still alive, one of the most respected scripture scholars in the country and indeed in the world, Jim Turo. He taught me in the seminary, and I think my favorite story with him is he was very, very brief. He just said what needed to be said, and we would end class early very frequently because he would have said all that he wanted to say, and he saw no reason for us to stay there till the end of the period when he was finished. And one time we were getting ready for the end of the semester, and we had final exams with Monsignor Turo, and the exams were to be oral exams. We would go into the classroom and we would sit with him, and he would ask us questions, and then that would be our exam. Well, on the day that I was scheduled to go for my oral exam, I was coming down from my room on the 4th floor of the seminary to go down to the main level to get ready to go into the classroom part of the building to meet with Monsignor Turo. And who gets into the elevator with me at the 4th floor as I got on but Monsignor Turo? And he starts talking to me as we're going down, and he was asking me some questions, and I said, well, this is good. This is good preparation for the exam. He said, no, you've already had it. And I had my final exam in Scripture Studies in an elevator traveling from the 4th floor to the main floor with one of the world's best Scripture scholars in the world. He wrote several books. My favorite one is this book called Reflections. Again, it's a collection of just looking at society, looking at life, and reflecting, thinking about it. I believe it's out of print. I believe it is available on the secondary market, and I highly recommend taking a look at it. Reflections by James Turo, Turro. My third selection is a book called The Giving Tree. I think everybody must have read this at some point. The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein, about a tree that really gives everything it's got, everything, every part of its being, every part of its fiber, for the sake of a person, another person, a little boy in the story. It's a really beautiful fable, I guess would be the kindest word to put towards it. Very, very memorable and good for all ages. The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein would certainly be on my list of great books. Another book by Joseph Girzone. It was called Joshua. And Joseph Girzone is a Catholic priest in the United States. He wrote several books in what they called the Joshua series, but the original book was Joshua. And it's a story about a person who really is Jesus. We come to the truth that this is Jesus living among us, and yet he's living in ways that we're not sure, well, how did he get, and how could this be Jesus, and is it Jesus? And you get to the end and you're convinced Jesus was really present in your life and in that person's life. Highly recommend Joshua by Joseph Girzone. I did one of my college paper, my high school papers rather, on, even in college, I did some too, on Flannery O'Connor. So any one of her 34 short stories, I would recommend highly Flannery O'Connor. By the way, her real name was Mary Flannery O'Connor. She wrote just using Flannery O'Connor because in the 1960s she felt that it would probably get her published a little bit more easily than Mary O'Connor. But Flannery O'Connor, highly recommend the short stories. And my last one is a book that I got word on kind of later in life. It was a book called The Shack, and it was written by William Young. And The Shack is a story about a father whose daughter is murdered, and he tries to come to terms with a God and his life and the daughter having been murdered, and dealing with that in a series of visions and really encounters with God. It's a very powerful and very beautiful story. So I would recommend, as part of my list of great books, The Shack by William Young. That's my list for right now on the great books. You know, I talk a lot about Father Garces. I'm very interested in his life. Someday there'll be a book coming out from my pen, perhaps a comic book, which is what I'm aiming for, about Father Garces, so I could spread his story. I think the best one that I told over the weekend at Mass was when he was asked by the Presidio captain who promised to give the Franciscans whatever he could out of his own funds, and they all had different requests. One wanted some vestments, one wanted some farm tools. And Father Garces, who was at San Xavier del Bac mission in Tucson at the time, said all he wanted was a lock to lock up his box of chocolates. He certainly knew what was important. He always said, he's a man after my own heart. If we had been alive at the same time, I hope we would have been friends. I think we would have enjoyed being with one another. Well, it's time for Pascal to come on down and join us. And as always, he brings a message. I was thinking Father Garces spent his life as a member of the Franciscan order, an order of friars minor founded by St. Francis of Assisi. And the motto of the order in Latin is Pax et Bonum, peace and good. That's what they strive for in life, peace and good, bringing peace into people's lives, bringing what is good into people's lives. I think that's a great way to approach life. We want to bring peace wherever we go. We want to bring what is good wherever we go. God bless you until next time.